Okay. Hello, everyone. Today is March 28th, 2022. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF certified meeting, so let's all be nice to each other and have a productive day. As I shared before starting the recording, the agenda is pretty light. Most folks are dealing with Kubernetes code freeze this week, so priorities are elsewhere. But we would like to get started. I guess we can go ahead with you, Laura, if you want to just give a quick intro, and then we can move over to some of the other stuff we've been hashing for quite a while.
Totes. Hello, everybody. My name is Laura, and I am a member of SIG Multicluster. And I just wanted to stop by because over there we've been talking about y'all. And in particular, there's a multi-cluster network policy proposal that Sanjeev has been working on that we talked about a little bit in SIG MC. There's some other SIG network related projects like a multi-network proposal, multi-cluster multi-network proposal too. And so SIG MC was just sort of feeling that there's like a higher than normal number of projects that needed a lot of cross-SIG collaboration related to networking. So we were just kind of talking about do we feel that these are get the space that they need in these diverse meetings, distributed meetings, or do we need to come up with something different? One potential proposal is a working group about multi-cluster networking in particular for as long as these shared projects are in flight. But we also can just continue as we are, or just all, more informally negotiate where we hang out with each other. Don't want to unnecessarily add extra meetings on people, but also don't want people to feel like they need to go to 10 different meetings to get the brain share of everybody that they need for their proposals. So anyways, that was it. I would love to take some input from this sub-project in particular, since multi-cluster network policy is one of the project candidates. And yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Laura. That's really great. And, I think this group hasn't been as in tune to the multi-cluster network policy proposal that Sanjeev has proposed. He hasn't presented it here yet. So we're still a little bit out of the loop. As to the multi-network policy proposal, I do kind of think it would be nice to maybe not even have a new SIG or anything, but maybe have representatives from both groups agree to start going to SIG Multicluster to have those discussions. So then we have everyone there. There hasn't been a lot of correlation between the multi-network SIG, I guess we can call it. I don't think they're a SIG, but it's just
just kind of a SIG network project, I guess.
Yeah.
Project is too strict of a word even too.
Right, exactly.
Initiative thingy.
But I totally agree. I think we need all the brains together there to kind of correlate for multi-cluster, multi-network. We're not gonna be able to do it trying to relay information between the meetings. I think the easiest way to do that would just be to all go to SIG Multicluster, because you're kind of in the middle of it all. I don't know what other folks think.
Yeah, I also feel like that will be easier. But by the way, some unrelated questions maybe. When is the SIG multi-cluster anyways?
Sorry, when is our meeting?
Yeah, when the meeting usually.
Yes, it's every other Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific.
Oh, okay.
And the next one is next week. So not tomorrow, but the week after.
I see.
There's the agenda, Yang. So that has everything, I think, that you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Is it an hour long?
It doesn't always go that long. It really depends on the agenda, but sometimes we're, discussing or debating large proposals, so it can run that long. So we kind of reserve that time.
And so can we talk a little bit about, just briefly, about goals from SIG Multicluster's perspective? Are you, is everyone in that group looking to develop an API, or is there already some POC that one of your implementations has done that you're looking to push, or are we even to that point yet?
Yeah, I would say we're not even to that point. And really the symptoms that I'm seeing is that people need to run around to get different people, or there's not kind of one place where we triage, like, this proposal hasn't gotten, comments since X time, like, can
Right.
we move it along? So it's more that everything's really early stage and we don't have it appears to me that symptomatically, because of like the way things are moving and the brain share that it appears that gets on things, that not everybody is like on the same timeline. So that's the problem. I really would like to find the best way to address without putting too many meetings on anybody's schedule.
Yeah. I'd say from our experience, the best thing to do is start documenting early so that people that hop in at different steps of the way, you can point them back, just to catch up so we don't rehash stuff a lot. I'd say too, a good place to get started, and it's actually really good right now because we're still in review, is to read the admin network policy API PR, just because there might be, I know like last time we had met, the discussion was around, do we make a new API for multi-cluster use cases, or do we try to repurpose maybe this new one that's coming in, admin network policy, more of like a cluster scope policy object, and have implementations of the MCS API adapt the use of that for multi-cluster scenario. So that might be a good place to have eyes from SIG Multicluster people, just like a good entry. But overall, I think meeting all together in y'all's SIG will be the best way forward. And maybe I can stop in the multi-network meeting. It's not this week, so it's next week as well, and kind of bring up the same thing. I don't know, you might have already done that, Laura. But...
talked to a couple people in DMs, but yeah, I think I'm in the initially was it the like go after individual people, see what's up, and now just trying to make sure that each SIG or subproject or working group that already exists kind of can put their 2 cents into this problem as well.
Awesome.
But yeah.
And Sanjeev, I think it has the most documentation around what's already been done. Yeah. And I think what would be really great is for us to come together and just agree on use cases. That's where this is all going to start. Like, can we as 3 groups kind of say, okay, this set of use cases like truly makes sense, and then we can move from there, right? As to where those are persisted, I mean, it could be a doc somewhere in SIG Multicluster. It could be a doc in our repo SIG Network Policy API. I guess we can hash that out together.
Okay, cool. Then I think in conclusion, it sounds like the multi-cluster network policy proposal has mostly actually been discussed in SIG Multicluster and maybe in SIG Network more than here. I don't know exactly all of the history, but anyways, that probably SIG Multicluster is a place to try and consolidate the like triaging and discussion about those and other related multi-cluster proposals, at least for now. And did I miss anything else?
I think that's good. I'm going to share the agenda of SIG Multicluster in our agenda, so folks who look at this later can figure out how to get into that meeting a little bit easier.
Cool. And standing invite to anybody who wants to hang in SIG Multicluster Slack channel or on the meeting agenda, and then we'll just keep an eye on if we're still having trouble getting all the brain share we need, and if we need to reassess if our strategy of engagement needs to be updated.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thanks so much for coming by here, Laura. I can attest the SIG Multicluster meetings are quite fun to go to, so it's not an inconvenience. Great, awesome. So let's move on from there. The only other major topic I have on the agenda for today, still just looking for reviews on mainly the admin network policy API. I'd say that's priority number 1. Casey Davenport gave a review. I updated the PR in response to that review, but we haven't had anyone from this group review it yet. So I'd say that's like priority number 1.
I took a path. I didn't really put anything onto it because from the API side, I feel like it's solid because we basically just used whatever is in the cap right now. So we've been going through the discussions a couple of times now, and I do remember that one of the things that might still be contending would be the priority 0, because I vaguely remember we talked about sending out a survey to see how people think, but did that actually never happen? So
that was in the last stages of getting the cap merged.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then after that, the consensus was, or at least I asked him, the consensus was, let's just get the API PR up and let's debate there. Like, let's do what we have so far.
Right. So I would guess that maybe we probably needed to present the debate on the PR itself, so that anybody, for example, Casey had a round of review, right? So at least when he's reviewing it, we see this still going on, and maybe we can get this conversation started there if people have any other ideas about priority 0. Otherwise, it will be as it is, and I'm totally fine with it. But I remember other people having troubles with having 0 being baseline. So
yeah, and we did have an engineer from Calico Cilium.
Mhm.
They haven't been really represented here in general. Comment on the PR after the KEP had merged, saying he was not comfortable with overloading the priority variable. So that was another check mark against it. So just for folks who are tuning in, let me rewind a little bit. In the KEP, there's 2 major unresolved bits. One is around this sort of special priority, as we call it, for a priority of 0, which basically allows admin network policy rules to be evaluated after network policy. And the other one we still need to resolve is how to calculate the maximum number of rules in a single admin network policy. More can be read on that in the KEP. But yeah, I'm happy to start that discussion. Those 2 unresolved items still haven't really been addressed on the API PR. The next one that I've been thinking a lot about, and some folks have reached out to me, is the question of north-south traffic, right? That's still the overarching, I think, question. And I see Dan's here. So Dan, can we get some of your opinions on, maybe let's start with, overloading of the priority field. We can kind of start talking about that as a group.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the north-south stuff.
Well, I figure we go in order. I don't know. What do you think is, well, whatever you want, whatever you think is the most important out of those 3 topics. So priority, calculating number of rules, and north-south. You can take a stab. We're happy to hear what you have to say.
Priority, I don't have a strong opinion about. So yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't reread, I haven't read Casey's comments on the PR and stuff, so I have to still catch up. Mm-hmm. You said some Cilium person commented. Was that where, on the KEP PR belatedly, or on the API PR, or
on the KEP PR belatedly? Let me go to it if I can here. Should commit. Sorry, wrong commit. The commit history is fairly long here. Boom. Okay. Yep. So Sean Crampton. Oh, actually Calico. Sorry. It was Calico, not Cilium. But basically that was just another plus.
Okay. So actually this is the comment that I kept making during the KEP, is that I was dubious that we only need a single less than network policy priority.
Right.
As opposed to many. So.
Right, exactly. And our constant argument against that was that our only use case for the 0 priority was to flip the underlying model from allow to deny. But
right, but and if you want to completely flip the underlying model, then you only need one rule. But like,
Yes.
what if somebody, has a more complicated thing where they want certain kinds of traffic to be allowed and certain kinds to be denied? And that might be most easily expressed as multiple policies.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I totally agree with that. Yang, what do you think on that?
So yeah, I definitely see where you're going on this, but a lot of the efforts in this CAP we have put into is to make sure that we have a lot of use cases specifically hashed out, and a lot of specific selectors which does not exist in the network policy, such as self, not self, same labels, not self labels, and those kind of selectors might help people in a way in terms of expressing what they wanted to deny or stuff like that without having to writing multiple rules on top of each other or even multiple policies. So that's why we felt like for the baseline, it might for 99% of the common use cases, people might get away just writing a single policy using simple single priority with specific rules. So that's where we were going with this. But we definitely somebody can come up with a specific case where you have to have multiple policies. And yes, that's a sort of like a loophole in the design right now. Rahul, you wanted to say something? Sorry, I'll mute myself.
Oh yeah, no worries. It was just a minor point. One of the things that we talked about, even like in the regular admin network policy thing, was we had some hypothetical concerns about the fact that we're creating this priority list, which basically forces us to do a linear evaluation, right? Of like, you have to look at priority 1 before you look at 2, before you look at 3. I'd be a little bit concerned if we essentially doubled the size of the potential search space by adding, another 1,000 priorities below network policy. That would be a little bit concerning. I don't know if we need to run benchmarks or have sample implementations.
Well, but I mean, it's not like, well, okay, so either nobody is actually going to create 1,000 separate rules less than network policy, in which case it doesn't matter that the numbers exist, like they're not causing problems. Or people are going to create those policies, in which case clearly they have some use case for it, and the fact that it's less efficient doesn't matter because they need that policy to be implemented. So anyway, but
I mean,
what Yang was saying about like, yeah, we did seriously consider all sorts of use cases and didn't find this necessary. I get, do you still have the window with, I forget who it was, with the Calico person's comment?
Yep, right here.
I forget what his name is.
Oh, it's Sean.
Yeah, Sean. So, and he's talking about his experience with Calico network policy, which only has more network policy like selectors and doesn't have the same labels and different labels and all that stuff. So it might be worthwhile to get him to give examples of things where people have needed multiple levels of priority in Calico network policy and see if those things can be implemented without multiple priority levels in admin network policy.
Right. I think
that's a really good idea.
I'll reach out to him on the CAP. And I brought this up just so we could look at it. This is kind of what we're talking about for folks who are less than familiar. Like, this is an easy way for us to say we're going to flip the baseline stance of everything in the cluster to deny. But Dan's saying, oh, what if we only wanted to flip the baseline stance of a few namespaces, right? That becomes harder here. Well, it becomes tricky unless you
or some kinds of traffic, but not other kinds of traffic, or
right
within the same namespace.
Right. Well, then you could just have different multiple ingresses, but yeah, right. The main problem is you're limited by a single subject of an admin network policy. And originally we had multiple subjects. We did remove that because we decided it didn't have enough of a value add at the end of the day. But yeah,
adding a data point here, we actually, when we were hashing out, sample specs for intra quote unquote cluster network policies, which is not exactly admin network policies, and we were hashing out, the sample specs for these policies. And one of the really common use cases, for the baseline deny, for example, we wanted to have these kind of rules implemented on the workload namespaces, but we don't want the policies to be applied to kube system, for example. And I guess this is the one possible scenario that Dan is referring to. And the workaround to that is that in the subject field, as you highlighted here, we have some match expressions, such as role which is not in system, and then by doing that we select all the namespaces which are basically not kube system. So there are some funny things we can do to a lot of the selectors here to make the policy work as intended, but it might not be just as straightforward as you having multiple rules stack on top of each other.
Right.
So we're essentially sort of advocating people to write a policy in a certain way so that it will be more easier on the priority side, I guess.
And in practice, I think most CNIs advocate for customers to write policy in a certain way, but for some reason we don't really do that upstream. We don't tell users they should use it like this, even though I think with this one, I'd like to have documentation that recommends suggested use pattern, because most people's use patterns are the same. And that might be kind of a solution to this problem, right? Not the solution. Anyway, I think there are some really good points here. I tried to take a few notes on the agenda. I would like to continue this thought on the KEP itself so we can kind of hash it out there. I think there was a couple of good options thrown out, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. Maybe we stop overloading priority and we give a limited range for baseline rules. We don't give priority 0 to 1,000. We only give 0 to 10, and maybe that'll be plenty.
Well, so that goes into, I think, your next unresolved thing, which was about the numeric range or whatever, right?
Correct. So we can hop over to that. Any other last points on priority equals 0? Going once, going twice. Sold. The next question was, with admin network policy, we would definitely want to give a bound on the total number of rules that can live in a single ANP object. This is, stemming off of Tim's, I think, dislike of infinite lists, which I think most of us can agree with. Right now, it's calculated as the total summation of admin network policy ingress rules and egress rules in a single ANP instance. So if we had, it would be the same for baseline policies, I would assume, but you aren't really going to max out a baseline policy, I don't think. This is a smaller unresolved item overall.
Okay, yeah, no, I was thinking this was still about is it 0 to 1,000 or 0 to 65535 and that whole thing, but I guess that must have gotten resolved to something.
That got resolved to 1,000, and let me just pull up to, I'm pretty sure I can pull up the KEP here, or the API definition here. We wrote it in the spec. Oh wow, this is funny now. Let me pull this up in a readable form. Yeah, so right now priority is bound 0 to 1,000. And then we still, in here, we have ingress and egress rules, just like network policy, and the summation of the two cannot exceed 100. That's what we have right now. That's unresolved on the KEP. Happy to change it around based on review. I'm less worried about that one than.
Yeah, I have no real opinion about that either.
It's harder to validate this in. I don't think there's a way to validate the total summation of ingress and egress using the Open API spec. That would be the one thing to think about. Or you just say you can only have 50 ingress, 50 egress, and then it's easy to do schema validation. But yeah, are there any other opinions there?
Just to clarify, are we saying the ingress object itself is what we're counting, or are we counting, I guess, the number of peers? I guess we can keep nesting this however deep we want, but
right. That's Right now it's just the number of items in the number of ingress rules. So like the number of items in this array. But we could change it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it only gets harder the deeper you try to nest, but
for validation's sake anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, this makes sense. I guess in an ideal world, it feels like we'd really want to limit the number of peers, because that's the real scaling factor at the end of the day. But yeah,
agreed. Let me think about that. Okay. And like I said, that's a smaller one. I'm glad we only have a few things to discuss now. This is for folks who haven't been here the whole time. Usually we have about 20 things to talk about with admin network policy. The last thing I want to talk about, which I think is the most important, is kind of a two-thing sort of thing. Right now, admin network policy, for those of you who have been along the whole ride, does not reference north-south traffic. It is written to address certain use cases that only touch in cluster east-west traffic. So what some people see as a big negative to the API is you can't technically isolate a pod from the entire world, right? It would fall on either an external cluster firewall or something along those lines to limit a pod from talking to google.com from in your cluster. And the reason I bring this up now is partly because Dan's here. The question becomes, what if we merge this KEP as is? We merge this API as is with no reference on north-south traffic. And then we realize in V2 alpha or V1 alpha 2, okay, we need it. Because I have a feeling the stigma has already been set with network policy. Users come in and they expect to be able to do this. And I'm really worried about users coming in and trying to do this and realizing they can't and hating that. I'm not saying it was the right decision to lump it in a network policy. I'm saying I'm worried about what that decision is, the effect that decision is going to have on users of this new spec.
So like I've been involved in various customer calls and like PM meetings and stuff lately, where things keep coming up. It's like, oh yeah, admin network policy is totally what this customer needs. Like it will solve all their problems, except inevitably they care about blocking egress traffic. It's not even ingress usually, especially because ingress is normally coming in from, it has to go through ingress or a load balancer or something, and there are other things there as well. Everybody wants to be able to block egress.
Right. So
I wanted to take a stab at one of the conversations I still think is unresolved when we merged the KEP. I remember Tim started out a thread, which a lot of you have commented, which is actually the behavior of the not-self or not-self same labels. Because as we're merging it right now, we say that the admin network policy peers cannot possibly select external things. But what does that mean for the not-self or not same labels? Because does that mean that everything except these namespaces, or everything in the cluster except these namespaces? And if we mean the latter, how would the CNI essentially differentiate it, basically? And that's still a problem. I guess at the end of the day, on the spread, people were just saying that, let's let CNIs decide what to implement, basically for the first pass, and then see how it goes. I remember that being the conclusion there.
That was the conclusion about the actual ability of CNIs to implement a firewall that ignores, north-south traffic. Like, is that feasible, right? That was, okay. Yeah.
I mean, we can't have this be undefined. Like,
no. Right now it's defined as it's allowed. I mean, north-south traffic is not selected, period. And that's the hard line right now. So it is defined. I mean,
okay.
The question I have is, if we go with as it's defined in this API, how much of an absolute nightmare? I mean, we're building the API to be more extensible, specifically with how we are defining how you select workloads. This is a good example. We fail close. Like, we define namespace set as a way to select namespaces, but if a consumer sees a nothing set, it's specified that something's unknown, we need to fail close. So from that perspective, it'd be easy for us to add a new selector. From a user perspective, I also have been kind of having nightmares about what Dan just said, and thinking that every customer in reality is going to want to address NorthSouth traffic. So then the question is, how much of an overhaul to the KEP and to the design would adding I guess an IP block selector to peer? I mean, I don't know.
So the big problem, I think, that resulted in it getting removed is that if you just add an IP block selector, there are all these weird edge cases that network policy currently has that are terrible.
Right.
And again, Ingress is worse than Egress for this. So maybe if we only added Egress support for now. And the other thing is, we only ever added IP block Ingress support because people didn't like the idea of having different selectors for Ingress and Egress. Nobody actually had a use case for Ingress IP block support. Like,
Really?
it was only added to be consistent, parallel, whatever.
Okay.
So we could possibly say we will define Egress IP block support, but not Ingress. And that is a little bit easier.
I think it's much easier in the sense that you don't have to define for the CNIs where the action point is, right?
Yeah, well, you still do, because there's the problem of what happens if like how service rewriting interacts with it. Well, I guess we can just define it to be a particular way and say, if that doesn't work for your CNI, then haha, you get to do extra work. The other thing that is complicated about Egress is that whole cluster egress firewall KEP that I had sent you the link to a long time ago, that there are things like people want cases like, I want to block access to the API server, and that sounds easier than it really is.
So yeah, I mean, my overarching goal and reason behind pushing not addressing north-south in this originally was to simplify the KEP and not have to answer some of these questions, because we already had to deal with answering all the questions. Second of all, I believed that there were enough user stories that were different to warrant a new resource like egress firewall. So in a perfect world, I would recommend users, control their cluster with a admin network policy set and also a cluster egress firewall set, right? So we have in cluster.
But people want to set baseline cluster egress policies as well. So and that works well with the existing admin network policy.
Yeah.
So
a follow-up point to what Andrew was saying was we've seen people want to configure natting capabilities as well on the egress. Like, they want to be able to say, let's set up a NAT gateway essentially, right, and then route traffic through that. That may or may, in my mind, that's a vote for a separate object, because the interaction between an admin network policy egress traffic and a NAT gateway is similar to the interaction between ingresses and network policy today, which is a total disaster. It'd be nice if we all sat down and said, hey, if we want to talk about egressing a cluster, here's the list of things that we need. We need, in my mind, at the very least, natting and a certain like allow deny firewall capabilities. And maybe there's a few others that we're missing, and maybe they all need to be bundled together right out of the gate to prevent some nasty interoperability.
Right, but then it can't be done in this object, right? That's sort of an object has to be indented across the gateway API, the services API. I feel like
So I think the most important thing in the admin network policy north-south question is we need to make sure that what we define here isn't going to mess up anything that somebody wants to define later. And I think that the decision that admin network policy has no effect on north-south traffic is the right decision there. Because if we said that it does, like if we said that admin network policy does block north-south traffic, then you have to eventually solve the problem within admin network policy. It prevents you from using anything else to control your north-south traffic, because
right.
This is a problem people have now with egress network policy rules, that they want to say, you know, you can't talk to any external IP, but then once they do that, suddenly they've blocked pods from talking to other pods as well. And they, like, you know, the things get in each other's way. So we want to make sure that we define this in a way that doesn't get in the way of what people might want to do if it doesn't, you know, actually solve it. And that probably requires more thought, but.
Speaking of having egress, like something like netting and egress control captured in a single object, do you think something like FQDN will fit in there as well, Rahul?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. Yeah, I absolutely think FQDN needs some answer there. I mean, even very simplistically, we need an answer there, because people are saying we're doing the namespace thing right now in the FQDN proposal, but we want a cluster-wide, you know, admin network policy equivalent for FQDN, and that, I think FQDN belongs in that egress conversation. I don't know what the right answer there is, but something needs to be decided.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
And so Dan, I'm going to link this KEP you wrote for egress firewall. Was there a major can you summarize like the major pushback you got, like why that didn't go ahead?
I don't think I ever even like filed that. It's something that I started and then never got finished enough to actually start pushing on.
Okay.
Like, yeah, that's why the link to it is to a branch in my fork, not to a PR, because there was never a PR. It never got that far.
100%. The last thing I can think of too is that, and this isn't ideal, because you could say that denying all to a pod or to a workload with admin network policy actually means deny all, and then not provide a method of poking holes in it, because then it would force folks to use a defined gateway to get traffic into their workloads, right? At the end of the day, if you restrict a pod intentionally from talking to google.com, I guess there is no defined egress gateway. Okay, never mind, scratch that. With ingress, it makes sense. With egress, there's not, because we have the ingress API or the gateway API, but it doesn't apply to egress, I don't believe, right? There is no egress gateway API. If there was, you could have technically then you could force, with admin network policy, force folks to use things the way they were designed, right? You could block everything to a pod outright and then say you have to use ingress API to get traffic to the pod, because that's the only thing we know about. It's the only thing we can select, and vice versa for egress. But it doesn't work because we don't have anything for egress. Okay. These are some really, really good thoughts.
Although, I mean, people could still implement like their own egress routers, basically, right? Like if pods in this namespace are only allowed to talk to pods in this other namespace, and pods in that namespace can talk everywhere. And so, you know, people could write their own egress routers, but
then it goes back to what has been done for so long. And that's the major problem, right? That really, I'd say from SIG Network's point of view, stuff hasn't been used exactly as they intended a lot of the times, right? So I look at that, and I think this group looks at that and says, how can we How can we push, not force anyone to do anything, but push folks in the right direction, right? Okay. These are some really good, really good thoughts.
A quick question. This is based off what you mentioned just now. If I write an admin network policy rule that says, either on ingress or egress, that says like you're not allowed to egress to anything. Essentially, we're saying you can't egress to any cluster endpoints, but you can egress to non-cluster endpoints. Is that even expressible as a firewall rule? Do you have to, I guess you have to list every single cluster endpoint and then put a not in front of it?
That's been the ongoing discussion in terms of Alpha 1. So the resolution to that question from Tim and from everyone, I think, has been, let's get V1 Alpha 1 in, and if CNIs can't implement it, they can't implement it. This API isn't going to work. We have to reanalyze it. I'm coming back today and saying, I've been hearing it, kind of along with Dan has stated, like, more and more I'm worried about customers. So I'm like, do we just cut that off and provide a mechanism to do it now, rather than sludge through V1 Alpha 1, do something that we don't know if it's possible, and then have to go back to the drawing board in a year.
Right.
Redo it.
But
yeah.
But I mean, we would eventually end up with an API that allowed you to express things like this pod can talk to any pod, but can't talk to things outside the cluster, or vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, network plugins have to be able to implement that.
Yeah.
Right. So coming from the Entra perspective, we have some sort of like solution for this. It's not, really clean, but it works. So essentially, if you actually know, for example, something like the cluster CIDR, then the CIDR is whatever you're implementing in the ACL rules. And then for the NorthSouth kind of things, you might know the namespace CIDR, or if you don't have something like that, you might know what pod exists in that namespace that you have specific IPs. So if you have a cluster CIDR minus a specific IPs, you have a finite number of CIDRs left that you can express as an address set, and you put those in the ACL rule, basically. So it's not going to be really scalable or neat, but CNIs will find a way to implement this.
I think, most CNIs have, a defined cluster network that encompasses, a CIDR that encompasses all pods.
ACSA in Catacode doesn't.
Well, I was going to say, we could say that you are allowed, like when we talk about all pods and inside the cluster and outside the cluster, we could say you're allowed to define a CIDR which is actually larger than the cluster and may include like some nearby hosts that are not actually pods or whatever. Like, it's important that it works correctly for things that are definitely in the cluster and for things that are far away from the cluster. But for other hosts nearby the cluster that might have overlapping IP spaces, we could allow some flexibility and say that it's not well defined whether they count as inside or outside the cluster.
Right. But if we did define it as segmenting everything, so going back again to like the baseline deny, I keep thinking about this a little more for now, and say that if you deny a workload, everything is blocked, north, south, east, west, and we still didn't allow a way to poke holes in that north-south wise, would that be the most outlandish thing ever? Like, I need to go look and see how many implementations actually have like an ingress or egress router. I know I'm thinking of OpenShift, like you could just deny or allow traffic to the ingress router pods, or the router pods, right? But I don't think you can enforce, I don't think we can possibly enforce.
I don't think that's a feature people want. Like,
okay. Okay, I think if anything, thinking just about egress definitely is the right way forward, not focusing on ingress and egress. And this is something we should definitely talk about more. Is there a good way for me on the KEP or on the API PR to bring this to the forefront? Like, should I just toss some sort of egress selector in there and try to advocate for discussion, or should I just make a big comment on the PR and ask
Maybe
for
open a
things
new
there.
issue.
Yeah, that actually might be the best. I think this is the biggest outstanding thing. If we were lazy, we could just ignore it and move forward, right? But this is.
I mean, looking back at what we did last year, I feel like a really good first step to this is basically talking to Tim. to be really honest.
Yeah, my first step's always talking to Dan. He's my sensei for this
Yes.
stuff. And then I go to Tim.
And then Tim.
Yeah. You guys are the Jedi masters. Okay, cool. I will also actually open an issue just for this specific thing, because the other stuff we can debate on the KEP. I feel like it's really small. This is a question I'd like to maybe summarize what we've talked about here today and put it in an issue so other folks coming in after code freeze next week can see like where we're at and why we're here. Because this was a really great conversation today. We didn't come to any super conclusions for anyone watching the recording, but I think there's a bunch of good points that need to be written down and debated before we merge this API, before it's too late, essentially. So yeah, is there any other concluding points folks would like to talk about in terms of admin network policy? Going once, going twice. I know we're all tired of talking about it, but thanks so much. Is there anything else? Rahul, I know you didn't really have too much to add for FQDN policy. I did poke the document here again for folks.
I mean, I can just tell you what I'm like where I'm at right now. So I've been busy for the past couple of weeks with like non FQDN Kubernetes stuff. But the last the status as I last left it was that we decided in the SIG network meeting that we would want to send out a survey to just network policy users at large and get an idea of what are they doing with this FQDN behavior. What are they looking for? Are they looking for a proper L7 policy behavior, like with HTTP verbs and like really full L7 support, or do they really want this FQDN behavior where we resolve an FQDN to IPs and then apply a policy based on that? So I put together a sample or a draft of a survey that I was just kicking around. It's not ready yet, but I'll try to get it polished up and send it out maybe later this week or early next week.
Great.
Where we can just brainstorm on, are we asking the right questions? Will we get good data if we send this out to people? And then we can take it from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great first step, especially if it's in like the Google Forms. You can like just make some easy data from it after the fact. And
Exactly. That would be, yeah, if we can get some good data out of there, that would be awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I think everyone's kind of been in that same boat. Thanks for staying on top of this, though. We appreciate it. And obviously now that we're talking, I mean, it does factor into AMP slightly, like just thinking about cluster-wide sort of policy and FQDN, possibility of combining the two one day. So
yeah.
Cool. Okay. And if you would like to know more about that, please read Rahul's document. It's really good. Okay, anything else from anybody? Last call for any items? Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much for everyone showing up today. Really appreciate having you, Dan. You're a big help here for some of this discussion. And hopefully we can get the API agreed upon and merged soon and start actually implementing something in this group. I think we'll have our hands full when that actually happens. So that's all I have for today. Thanks, everyone. And we'll be talking to you all soon. Have a good one.
Thanks. See y'all.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye.